We'll call this hearing to order. Where have you got my script here? I'll ask unanimous consent that the chair be authorized to declare recesses during today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that members not on the subcommittee be permitted to sit with the subcommittee at today's hearing and ask questions. Without objection, so ordered. I guess that means that Bo and Remy are allowed to stay. So thank you, too, for coming. This morning, we're going to be discussing an issue of great importance to me and I think to the country when it comes to emergency preparedness and response, and that's animal welfare in disasters. 85 million families in the United States have at least one pet. That's nearly 67% of all households in the country. These pets, these animals, are like members of our family, and their safety has a major impact on how people prepare for, respond to, and recover from disasters. The issue of caring for animals in emergencies is not a new concern. In fact, we can look to many of the world's oldest cultures and religions for the first evidence of emergency planning for animals in disasters. In Genesis, we find the story of Noah and the great flood. In it, God directs Noah to gather up 2 of each animal onto the ark to save them from the impending flood. So whether it's a family cat, a service animal, the cattle on your ranch, a working dog along a first responder, when we take care of these animals during a disaster, it makes it easier for people to be willing to evacuate and then later in the process of recovery. And speaking of evacuation, in fact, there was a study done after Katrina that showed of those who failed to evacuate, 44% stated that it was because they didn't want to leave their pets behind. So today we'll explore existing authorities in the Stafford Act that help guide FEMA's work in this space and the assistance it provides to states and localities. We'll examine gaps in federal emergency management policy that have led to family separation from their pets and the deaths of tens of thousands of animals. We'll also hear from groups providing services outside of the Stafford framework and hear about opportunities where the federal government could promote animal welfare and help alleviate these separations and losses. I'll note that in the recently passed Disaster Recovery and Reform Act, known as DURA, we included language to establish veterinary response teams utilizing the expertise of our nation's unsurpassed higher ed veterinary programs. The provision, Section 1218, is the next step in a progression of public policy developed in response to animal-related challenges dating back to the early 1990s and Hurricane Andrew. They have unfortunately continued to be an issue in large and small-scale events such as Hurricane Katrina, Rita, Wilma, Florence, Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Michael, Superstorm Sandy, and the recent California wildfires. However, much to my dismay, FEMA has so far chosen to ignore this provision. During the last 5 years alone, our nation has experienced nearly 500 presidentially declared disaster events, including, as I listed, significant hurricanes, wildfires, floods, and earthquakes. In each of these instances, we've repeatedly seen the challenges that come with a federal response to disaster when tens of thousands of animals, some were rescued and evacuated, some reunited, but some lost. Prussian German philosopher Kant famously said, "We can judge the heart of a man by his treatment of animals." So let us be judged today by what we can accomplish to protect animals in disasters. So today's hearing will provide this subcommittee with an opportunity to examine whether our federal emergency management policies measure up to our nation's affection for our pets and our flocks. I want to thank our witnesses who are here today. We look forward to your discussion, and also thank other animal groups, including the Humane Society, that have helped us to work on this issue. I would now like to call on the ranking member of the committee, Mr. Meadows, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Chairwoman Titus. Thank you for your leadership. Thank all the witnesses for being here today. Obviously, examining the issues of animals in disasters is not only an important topic for preparing and responding to disasters, but as we all know, animals play a unique role in terms of the resources following a disaster, aiding in search and rescue, serving people with disabilities necessary to individuals' livelihood in the agricultural community, or even as many Americans feel today, pets are truly part and members of their family. And so as all of those variations of animals in disaster situations present unique challenges and opportunities for the federal government, aiding in all phases of disaster response and recovery. Particularly today, I'm pleased to have a witness from my home state of North Carolina, Dr. Mikas, who serves as the state veterinarian. Thank you for being here. You know very well what it's like to deal with these issues, having a number of storms hit North Carolina, and so whether it's from small household pets to larger animals in the agricultural community, they provide unique challenges. So I look forward to hearing your expertise today. I also want to go a little bit further because we're going to focus on the critical issue of saving lives and helping communities rebuild smarter and faster after a disaster. Addressing these challenges related to animals is also important. The canines and their handlers in the search and rescue teams are critical to saving lives. My son actually has trained a chocolate lab that is actually not only companion, but part of the family, and they travel everywhere together, and you can mess with the dad, but you can't mess with his dog. So ensuring their proper care while engaged in search and rescue missions also is critically important so that we don't put them in harm's way. In rural communities, as I mentioned earlier, livestock is critical to state and local economies and ultimately to the nation's food supply. Effective preparedness and planning for response and recovery must include how we plan for and manage animals in these areas hit by disasters. I know that in the hurricane in North Carolina, we were having to bring in boxcars to try to move some of the livestock that potentially was in harm's way. And so I look forward to hearing from all of you today as we look at this issue and how we can address best practices where we can do better. And I thank you all for being here, and I yield back to the chairwoman.
Thank you, Mr. Meadows. We're not going to have any other testimony. Other members will come and go, but for now, we'll just move on to our witnesses, and I'd like to welcome you all and thank you for being here. You're truly the experts in this area, and we look forward to your testimony. Dr. Wesley Bassett, who is here, he's the Director of Veterinary Emergency Team, College of Veterinary Medicine at Texas A&M. Dr. Mikas, the State Veterinarian for the Department of Agriculture, State of North Carolina. Teresa McPherson, who is a canine search specialist with the Fire and Rescue Department, Virginia Task Force 1, Fairfax County, Virginia. And Mr. Richard Patt, who's the Vice President, Federal Affairs for the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Thank you very much for being here today. We all look forward to hearing what you have to advise us. And without objection, our witnesses' full statements will be included in the record. Since your written testimony has already been made a part of the record, the subcommittee requests that you limit your testimony to 5 minutes. So we'll proceed with it with Dr. Bassett.
Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Meadows, Vice Chairwoman Fletcher, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you for inviting me to testify regarding the impact of disasters on animals. My name is Dr. Wesley Bassett, and I'm the director of the Texas A&M Veterinary Emergency Team at the Texas A&M College of Veterinary Medicine. All too often, disaster impacts on animals and their owners are seen as separate issues. But as you will hear from my testimony, they are one and the same and must be looked at in that manner. Human health, well-being, and safety is always the highest priority in disaster settings. And I'm not here to testify that animals should be given equal priority. The reality is, however, that people will factor in their animals when deciding how to respond to a threat, and many will make decisions that are not in their best interest if their animals are not provided for. An example is provided by a woman from the coast of Texas who refused to evacuate prior to Hurricane Ike. She had had a knee replacement, lived in an elevated house, and had an elderly dog, could not carry it down the flight of stairs. She did not know that help was available, and unfortunately, she was identified by the serial number on her knee replacement hardware across the bay and about 6 miles from her home. That was shared with me by an official in Chambers County. That's the county in which her body was found. As the director of the Texas A&M Vet, I've experienced just how intertwined the human and animal condition is. Through our response to numerous disasters in Texas and to the Camp Wildfire in Paradise, California, we have experienced those times when victims are reunited with their animals. These are powerful interactions that I believe provide one of the first opportunities for their recovery. A common phrase that I hear during these interactions is, "Doc, everything's going to be okay." It's often the first time these people tell their stories and realize that they can indeed take a step toward a renewed future. So it's a matter of hope. I would further argue that the highest priority, human health, well-being, and safety, can never be fully addressed without addressing the animal condition. Agricultural animals have the additional distinction of also being economically important species. Animal ag losses for Hurricane Harvey in Texas was estimated at $93 million. That's a huge number at the state level, but think, what does it mean on a finer scale? A family farm's losses reflect the loss of years of hard work and threaten their ability to recover their operations and feed their families. This escalates as you have multiple producers that are impacted, particularly in communities whose economic base is derived from the agricultural sector. It threatens recovery at the community level and persists well beyond the time when all the debris has been cleared. Solving these problems is complex and quite frankly beyond what many local and even state governments can accomplish. I would also argue that the current approach to federal level support, particularly in the veterinary medical arena, is insufficient as well. The Texas A&M Vet was formed in 2010 with the charge of providing a holistic approach to the animal problem in our state. We have fulfilled this charge through working in 4 domains grounded in veterinary medicine. First, we provide direct support for development of local-level, animal-focused emergency plans, and also by developing mitigative strategies for animal-based entities. Second, we provide veterinary medical support to local communities in response to natural and man-made disasters. Third, our team supports Texas Task Force 1 and other members of the USAR network that train in and are deployed to Texas. We have an aggressive approach for dealing with search and rescue dog issues that's based in prevention and recovery. Texas Task Force 1 estimates that we increase the operational time of search dogs by at least 50%. And that's significant because that's also hope for the person that's lost. Fourth, our senior vet students participate in all of our activities. This augments immediate operational capacities and also builds capacity for the future. The Disaster Recovery Reform Act authorized Fema to establish national veterinary emergency teams at colleges of veterinary medicine. This provides an opportunity for teams like ours to be an immediate federal resource and for new teams to be built. The programs I have described above represents a significant advancement over veterinary medical disaster response assets that are currently in the federal inventory. In closing, I would like to thank you again for inviting me to testify. I appreciate the committee's commitment to ensuring that the highest priority, human health, well-being, and safety, is fully addressed by also addressing the animal issue.
Thank you. Dr. Meckes?
Chairman Titus, Ranking Member Meadows, greetings from downtown Raleigh. Members of the Subcommittee, Economic Development, Public Buildings, and Emergency Management. I'm Dr. Doug Meckes. I serve as a state veterinarian and director of the Veterinary Division in the North Carolina Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. The division includes 150 employees that serve North Carolina's poultry and livestock industries that manage and operate the state's 4 veterinary diagnostic laboratories, and the groups that is charged with the implementation of our Animal Welfare Act in kennels, shelters, and other animal facilities throughout the state. North Carolina's robust agriculture and agribusiness industry is the #1 industry in the state and generated $91.8 million in economic value to North Carolina's economy in 2018, more than 17% of the state's gross domestic product. The sector also employs 17% of the state's workforce. Within agriculture and agribusiness in North Carolina, the animal agriculture industry, comprised of livestock, dairy, and poultry, accounted for 68.5% of the $11.13 billion in cash receipts in 2018. North Carolina ranks second in hog production, second in turkey production, and is one of the most diverse poultry-producing states in the U.S. At these levels of production, there are significant numbers of animals and poultry on the ground on any given day in North Carolina, as many as 9 million pigs and 190 million poultry. That said, natural disasters or animal diseases have the potential to impact large numbers of any of these species. The single most significant disaster in North Carolina history, the event that is now the frame of reference for all natural disasters, is Hurricane Floyd, September 11th, 1999. It resulted in the most severe flooding and devastation of North Carolina's history at that point in time. The flooding resulted in $813 million in agricultural losses, the demise of 2.9 million birds, 28,000 pigs, and 619 cattle. Disposal of mortality was managed in whatever fashion was most convenient, and sadly to the detriment of the environment in some circumstances. Given North Carolina's commitment to properly managing mortality today, such an approach is unacceptable. In fact, Agricultural Commissioner Steve Troxler's marching orders with regards to storms and animal disease are, we will not create an environmental disaster associated with an incident of mass mortality in our animal or poultry production. That guidance has served us well in North Carolina of late, for we've experienced 3 major hurricanes since 2016, 2 of which required significant mortality management efforts on our part. North Carolina also has engaged in planning efforts since 2015 and 2016 for management of an outbreak of high-path avian influenza in our state. Fortunately, that's not come to pass. And since 2018, we have engaged in planning efforts for management of swine mortality in the event of an outbreak of African swine fever. The efforts of North Carolina's agricultural response teams have undertaken, in collaboration with our state colleagues, our subject matter experts from around the country, have contributed mightily to the current state of the art of composting in animal and poultry mortality. I must also note that during Hurricane Matthew and Florence, Fema engaged with our agriculture community in a most meaningful way, providing support for our various activities in managing poultry mortality. FEMA's support of North Carolina's efforts to protect public health and minimize environmental impact markedly decreased our response duration and provided for a more timely recovery of participating poultry farms. North Carolina looks forward to expanding our partnership with FEMA and moving forward to a better understanding of FEMA's role in response to animal agriculture disasters. With regard to the management of companion animals during disasters, I highlighted in my written testimony the activities of the Veterinary Division's Animal Welfare Section, the Emergency Programs Division, and county animal control assets in response to such incidents. Finally, I must say, the Veterinary Division and the Emergency Programs Division in North Carolina believe there are currently gaps in existing capability at the state and federal level to manage a catastrophic animal disease outbreak. Such an incident, usually considered the sole responsibility of USDA, could be of such consequence that all responses available would need to be brought to bear. Given the global character of trade, of travel, of illegal movements of agricultural products, perhaps it's time to consider a fully integrated approach to such event. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today on North Carolina's management of animals in disaster, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Dr. Ms. McPherson.
Good morning, Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Meadows, and members of the subcommittee. Thank you very much for this opportunity to testify on the issue of animals in disaster. In my case, search and rescue dogs. I'm Teresa McPherson. I'm a member of Virginia Task Force 1, which is one of the 28 urban search and rescue teams in the country. And my position on the task force is Canine Search Specialist. I'm a dog handler. I've been a member of the federal system since 1993 and have some extensive experience with flying dogs commercially in cabin. I'll be speaking for the federal USAR dogs, but I understand that many, if not most, of the state teams also fall within the realm of what I'll be talking about. In the past, we dog handlers have had it pretty good with flying our dogs for training, testing, and deploying. We have been loosely lumped under service animals. And I would say our dogs are on a par with service animals as far as health, temperament, and obedience training, which are the main things that the airlines are concerned with. After that, our paths diverge from service dog training, but the airlines don't really care that our dogs are trained to climb ladders, take a direction from 50 yards out, traverse rubble, searching for victims in disaster situations like earthquakes, hurricanes, explosions, mudslides, tornadoes, pretty much whatever comes up. Our dogs are trained and tested to handle it. In 2005, for Hurricane Katrina, all of the FEMA task forces responded on a rotational basis to Louisiana and Mississippi. Some task forces responding twice. At one point, I was asked by the FEMA USAR branch office for the FAA regulation that allows our dogs to fly in cabin commercially. They needed to get a lot of people to and from this place. I responded that there is none. This was met with surprise, and there was discussion of addressing this issue in the future. But at this time, we really weren't having any problems with flying our dogs commercially in cabin. They were being very accommodating, even welcoming. They treated our dogs like heroes. But this has changed drastically in the past few years. The last time I was in the security line with my dog, I heard a passenger behind me say, "Wow, anyone can buy a working vest for a dog online." And sadly, it's true, and people do. Currently, the airlines have to deal with dogs with virtually no training, poor temperament, health issues, mainly because of fake working dogs and fake emotional support animals. And I do not mean to disparage the legitimate service dogs or the legitimate ESAs. I'm talking about the passenger who rings her call button and advises the flight attendant that her emotional support animal just pooped on the floor. It needs cleaning up. True story. Now the regulations are tightening up, and we're happy about that. But it's affecting our dogs in a negative way because of the definition of a service animal, which is an animal that provides a specific function for a disabled person. That's not us. So now we have no place, and the airlines don't know what to do with us. They make individual regulations that vary from airline to airline, change often, and result in general confusion on the part of the handler as well as the airline personnel. Many times we have to wait while a supervisor is summoned or get in a special line and wait until the dog guy comes in. It's time to legitimize our dogs and to be on a par with service animals for air transport. All of our dogs are screened, trained, tested, and certified. It's important to know that we can get to and from a disaster with our dogs. Though we can respond as a specific canine resource, most often we respond with our task force, which is 50 to 70 plus members and comprised of heavy rescue, logistics, medical, hazmat, structural engineers, and more. And getting the dog component on board can be problematic for the whole team. We can provide the necessary paperwork to show our dogs are of sound temperament, healthy and well-behaved. We would like to see this request to fly our dogs in cabin expanded to apply to training and testing as well as deployment. It's important that the dogs are trained and tested in a variety of situations. They need to travel to different training sites. They need to experience different environments because we need to train them to expect the unexpected. The Haiti deployment really validated our dogs. There was no way to replicate in training a scene of such mass destruction. Never-ending rubble, decomposing bodies everywhere, garbage, loose animals running around, yet our dogs worked in this nightmare, and they found people, including children and babies, saving their lives. So our training works. But in order to teach our dogs to expect the unexpected, we need to continue to have the opportunities to train for it. And I thank you for this opportunity. I look forward to working with the subcommittee as it looks to address the challenges to ensure our search and rescue dogs are able to travel without restriction, whether for disaster response, training, or evaluation in our effort to save lives.
Thank you so much. Mr. Patch?
Good morning, Chairwoman Titus, Ranking Member Meadows, members of the subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to present our testimony on the importance of protecting animals during disasters. My name is Richard Patch. I'm the Vice President for Federal Affairs for the American Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. Founded in 1866, the ASPCA was the very first animal welfare organization established in North America. The ASPCA has a strong history of leadership in protecting animals in times of disaster. We are pleased that local, state, and federal agencies are increasingly prioritizing the care of animals during disasters. The ASPCA has witnessed firsthand how a lack of preparation can lead to dire consequences for animals left behind, and how the absence of appropriate planning can create burdens and risks for human victims as well as responders. It is important that we continue to elevate the need to include animals in disaster planning. Today, I'd like to discuss our organization's work in disasters, as well as some policy changes that will ensure animals are better protected. The ASPCA deploys nationwide at the invitation of state and local authorities to assist in relocation, search and rescue, sheltering, and placement of animals during disasters, including wildfires, tornadoes, hurricanes, and floods. Recent examples include responding with local authorities to the wildfires that devastated Northern California last fall, assisting with search and rescue for animals affected by historic flooding in central Arkansas, and responding to multiple hurricanes, including Florence in North Carolina and Michael in Florida. One of the key lessons learned during and since Hurricane Katrina, where an estimated 600,000 animals died or were left to suffer without rescue or shelter, was that animals must always be a part of disaster planning. We cannot forget the images of dogs swimming to rescue boats or stranded on rooftops, nor can we forget the heartbreak of a 9-year-old boy separated by authorities from his dog Snowball while boarding a bus to evacuate. Many, faced with the difficult choice between evacuating to safety without their pets or staying behind, chose to stay with their pets. This is why modern, thoughtful disaster planning should always include animals. We are thankful that Congress responded to the lessons from Katrina by passing the Pet Evacuation and Transportation Standards Act, the PETS Act, which requires that state and local entities include the needs of individuals with household pets and service animals into their disaster plans. Additionally, Congress passed the Veterinary Medicine Mobility Act, which clarified that veterinarians could transport and dispense vital medicines while practicing in the field, including during disasters. However, there are still gaps for animals in disaster planning that Congress can and should address. First, the ASPCA urges Congress to pass H.R. 1042, the Prepared Act. This bipartisan legislation, sponsored by Chairwoman Titus and Congressman Peter King, will ensure that animals in certain institutional settings, like zoos, research facilities, and commercial breeding operations, create common-sense plans to protect the animals in their care during disasters. Although these entities are regulated by USDA under the Animal Welfare Act, there are no federal requirements that these facilities have emergency or disaster plans in place. Second, we see a need for more resources to provide training and equipment for first responders to better handle and care for animals. An ASPCA survey revealed that more than 75% of responding states and counties reported additional needs for emergency training, expertise, and equipment. Third, veterinarians need more flexibility to deploy across state lines in response to disasters. We know hurricanes and other storms don't stop at state lines, Neither should our ability to provide emergency care to animals in disasters. Lastly, there should be greater use of cohabitated and co-located shelters. Cohabitated shelters house people and pets together within a shelter, while co-located shelters have separate facilities for the humans and pets, but are typically in close proximity, enabling the families to regularly visit their pets and even provide for their care. We look forward to working with the subcommittee to find the best solutions to these challenges. With natural disasters occurring with increasing frequency and greater ferocity, preparedness is becoming ever more important. Thank you so much for the opportunity to testify. I look forward to responding to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Patch. Thank you all again for your testimony. You are the experts, and you've given us some things that we can work on. We'll now move on to member questions. Each member will be recognized for 5 minutes, and I'll start by recognizing myself. I'd like to start with you, Ms. McPherson. You were talking about the challenges for your dogs going for training, for deployment, and for evaluation, and the problem with being on airline travel. You're an elite first responder. You need to get there. Your dog is your team. Are there other places where you've experienced some challenges being with your dog besides on the airlines? And do you have any specific suggestions that we might do working with the airlines to solve this problem? Because you're right, I've seen people carry a snake on a plane to say it's a support animal. Didn't give me much support having it sitting near me, but you know.
All right, now. Thank you for that question. Really, our main concern right now is the in-cabin airline travel. As far as restaurants or public locations, we're not that concerned about because we try to be respectful. If they don't need to be there, we don't try to put them there. Hotels, though, that would be good to come under the service dog label, or not their label, but our own label, but under that same category, so that we can lodge with our pets. Because sometimes with our dogs and on deployment, we are in hotels, and that can become problematic, just like the airline flying. It's like, well, it's not really a service dog.
So I was going to ask you, when you get to the scene of the disaster, where do you go with your dogs? I mean,
Lots of times we're in tents.
uh-huh.
Sometimes we're in a sleeping bag on a parking lot until we can get the tents up. But for many deployments, especially hurricanes, we are lodged in hotels if it's possible.
Okay, thank you. Well, then we'll look at that definition, see if we can expand it. Mr. Patch, you mentioned in your last recommendation, and the ones you gave were really good and some things that we can actually get done. I don't want to wait till we get a massive bill. If there are little pieces that we can make improvements on, that's the intent of this committee. But the need for adequate resources, I would ask all of you. Mr. Patch says we need more resources. Doctor, could you address that? What can FEMA be doing better, and what kind of resources do we need to enhance?
Well, I'll start with the veterinary medical piece, and again, FEMA has this opportunity, and there are distinct differences between what teams like ours does and what the current inventory of response capabilities does from a veterinary medical perspective. And so we really need to push that because, you know, a key part of what we do is working with communities on preparedness. We're planners as well as responders. I don't see, my own personal opinion, I think you need to be both. And we do that down at the local level, and the reality is they struggle to have the expertise, many local jurisdictions, to develop animal-focused plans. And so it just makes the situation worse when something does happen because there's not a good plan there. And so having resources like ours that can play into that, I think is critically important.
Have you looked at the Prepare Act that was mentioned that I've introduced to see if that kind of goes in the direction you're talking about?
It does, and I think that, I know that there's a desire to have more accountability on information that's kept for animals by local jurisdictions, and that's so important because the reality is we have I think in many disasters, we have animals wind up leaving the disaster area, and those victims don't have that opportunity to recover. It's typically household pets, but it could be livestock as well. And so any provisions like that to tighten things up and to drive us to a more prepared society, I think is a really good thing. And a team like ours can help toward that end.
Dr. Meckus, North Carolina's got a good reputation for leaning in on planning. We appreciate that. I know that FEMA has like a field hospital that it can take to a disaster site. Do we need something like a field hospital for veterinary services that's similar to that?
During our most recent disasters, our animal welfare section, our emergency programs division, and our county animal control staff responded to all of the companion animal needs in a timely fashion. And we were able to move animals out of shelters that were in harm's way. We were able to bring resources to bear once the storm passed, and most of the animals ended up in shelters. So, and with veterinary resources to care for them. So I'm not certain that a hospital as such would be needed. If it were, it'd be for a very short time basis. With regards to the livestock side, which is what we've been so engaged with, in Matthew, we met with FEMA the day after landfall. We had a feel for the impact, especially to our poultry industry, given the knowledge we have of the location of the landfall and the location of our poultry farms. And FEMA stepped up and provided us funding to buy carbon source material to begin to compost these birds in short order. So, and in the subsequent Hurricane Florence, in which we had to respond as well, we had really perfected some of our techniques, perfected our movement of product, movement of animals to make certain that we could do it in a timely fashion. So after Matthew, it took almost 4 months for us to finish all the composting activities. After Florence, it took us 35 days, and we got folks back in business.
I'm glad to hear you had a good relationship with FEMA, because that's part of the challenge, is getting the FEMA reimbursements after some of these problems to deal with animals. Yes. Mr. Meadows?
Dr. Meckus, I want to come back to the FEMA reimbursement side, because you mentioned that in your opening testimony, and obviously sometimes the response in terms of reimbursement is either ambiguous or not at all. What would be the two things that you would recommend that we could do in terms of reimbursement for this component of either livestock reimbursement or animal shelters? Obviously, if you have a number of household domestic pets that are being housed, there's an expense that goes along with that. Is that something that the counties just take on themselves? Does it get reimbursed, or what could we do to improve that?
Well, with regards to the companion animals, the counties have taken that on themselves. And again, as I mentioned, our welfare section, volunteers from different counties will move to those counties most profoundly affected. And we've not had to call upon FEMA for funds for managing of companion animals. We've gotten donations. We brought our colleagues from around the country to assist us, and any number of rescue groups are engaged as well. With regards to reimbursement for livestock and poultry issues, some of the pieces have been well accepted. Our proposals have been well accepted by FEMA, others less so. And we've had, persistence has been the key for us in receiving reimbursements.
All right, so how do we take the need for persistence right now, as you would delicately put it, and maybe change that into something that's a little bit better defined, that says, all right, if you hit this, then you qualify. Here's my concern is county by county, you have different budgets. Right. And as you know, in the eastern part of the state, some of those counties are well equipped and well funded to be able to loan the money. other counties have a extremely difficult time, especially when you're taxing with other issues that are not livestock related. So it could be, search and rescue. It could be a number of other taxing. So how do we take that part where what I don't want you to have to do is call the chairwoman or me and say we're having a problem getting reimbursed from Fema if there's something that we can do legislatively to address that. Is that something you could come up with 2 or 3 recommendations and get back to the committee on?
We can get back. I will say that it's all a matter of interpretation at the end of the day. We interpretate some of the guidance from FEMA as meaning they'll fully embrace our activities associated with response to livestock incidents. There's a gap there. USDA obviously has no piece of natural disasters and responding to them, but from our point of view, it's much better to get feed to animals and diesel fuel to farms to keep the animals alive than it is to buy carbon source material to compost them after they're dead. And so,
well, I would agree with that. And so I guess what I would say,
clarity.
So if on that clarity, if you could get with Commissioner Troxler and Mr. Sprayberry and get a recommendation back to this committee, I think there's a bipartisan support to do what is practical and not make it ambiguous. Mr. Patch, let me come to you. One of the difficulties anytime that you have displaced people is that you have displaced animals as well. And I can tell you that what I would ask for you is maybe get to this committee your recommendations on how we can address the difficulty of cohabitating with animals that are perhaps displaced. Because when you put people in an emergency shelter, it becomes, my pet may not be as welcomed as some other domestic pets, and it's kind of like with children. Some of them are great, and some of them are not as great. And these are great back here. So. And so my concern is what is acceptable for someone may not be acceptable for someone that you're in a close confines with kids and all kinds of other things. And so if you could help us with some recommendations on what you think is ideal, and then maybe what is practical, if you could get the committee some recommendations there, knowing that what is maybe ideal is not achievable, but the next best thing, if you could do that for us, Mr. Patch.
Sure, Congressman, we will get you those recommendations. I'll say, I wanted to tell you, I'm from Greenville, North Carolina.
No, I know, and I tell you, I knew when I introduced him. Actually, my staff had told me that, and I could say go Pirates or go something, that is there. So I'm not sure if you're in G.K. Butterfield's district or in Dr. Murphy's district, but regardless, on their behalf, welcome as well.
Thank you. Well, let me say, my mother lives in Morehead City, North Carolina, and I live here in D.C., so I worry about her a lot. These storms that are affecting the coast of North Carolina have been tremendous, particularly in recent years. Some of the work that the ASPCA does is to move animals out of those shelters in those affected areas before the storms come and free up the resources of the hard-working people that operate those shelters while the storms are happening, so that there's some place for those animals to go. And as I mentioned in the testimony, I think greater flexibility is what you've heard from all of these witnesses today in times of disaster, and that's true for the cohabitated and co-located shelters.
I thank you for flexibility.
Thank you.
Thank you. Ms. McCarcel?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a special guest here with me today, Remy, because he's very interested in hearing from all of you this morning. This issue hits very close to me. I represent an area in South Florida where we're heavily impacted by storms. It seems like every summer, every year, we have to prepare for a hurricane. And I have 2 dogs at home, Callie and Spike, and they're part of our family. I have kids also, and my kids and my dogs actually behave very well, Mr. Meadows. I don't know what you're... but
I would expect nothing less.
So I just can't imagine leaving them behind. And it was so interesting to me to see that 44% of the people who didn't evacuate during Hurricane Katrina did so because they didn't want to leave their pets. And I know that this is even more of a reality for our seniors. So I don't want anyone in my district to make the decision of whether they leave and leave their pet behind or not. So Mr. Patch, in your written testimony, I just wanted to start by asking, you outlined some ways that people can prepare to care for their pets, and I just wanna, if you could briefly describe that for everyone that's listening right now at home, what people can do, and if you can highlight those steps that people need to take to prepare for a hurricane.
Yes, ma'am. And in response to your observation about people staying behind with their pets, it's heroic that they stay behind to care for their pets, but it's a failure of proper planning. And part of that planning is ensuring that you are prepared to leave when it's necessary. And in a district like yours, where these storms seem to hit with tremendous force, it's important that anyone that lives in an area like that have ID tags for their animals and have their microchips updated and that they have supplies for the animals and that they have a plan. Where are they going to go? Who's going to take care of the animals? Can they keep the animals with them? Can they get on a bus or a train or a plane? Being prepared and knowing those things in advance is important. And back to the chairwoman's legislation, ensuring that commercial enterprises, zoos and research facilities and breeding operations, and they know that these things could happen and they should be prepared in the title of your bill. They need to be prepared in advance.
We have one of the most beautiful zoos in the country in my district also, Zoo Miami, and I know that they do a really great job of preparing for hurricanes. Is it possible, since you're mentioning this again, that they can actually coordinate with vets in the area to actually also take in some of these pets? I don't see that working as well, but if you can provide some examples or ideas on that.
I can't speak to that exact idea. I think, in response to your question, I think good zoos, good accredited zoos are prepared. They have a disaster plan. They're more prepared than many others. Whether or not they could help, I think it depends on the events of that particular moment, but they should be prepared to provide that service if it's possible, sure.
Thank you. And Dr. Bissett, like your emergency team at Texas A&M, the important work that they do to keep both animals and their owners safe, I'm very proud of the similar work that we have in Florida by the University of Florida Vets Disaster Response Team. But unfortunately, there aren't enough people who are trained to take care of animals during disasters. In your testimony, you demonstrate how emergency teams from colleges of vet medicine are so crucial to disaster responses. And I can't imagine trying to coordinate disaster response for people without public health professionals or hospital systems involved. So it seems like there should be veterinary professionals involved in animal disaster planning and response. Do you know of any available funding streams to strengthen training programs for veterinarians to be on the ground during disasters?
So I can tell you that's been a significant problem. Even with our team, we are the state's deployable veterinary medical resource, and yet we have had to survive and prepare primarily on donations. Donations wax and wane, and the challenges of maintaining a deployable unit with a constant level of readiness and a wildly fluctuating budget is a challenge. And you do have to be trained to go into these situations. Our team, which is made up of faculty, staff, and students from the college, as well as private practitioners, private veterinary medical professionals from around the state, we have aggressive training. We have monthly trainings, we have multiple exercises a year, and it's all geared toward making sure that we can go into a community, work with that community to perform a safe and effective response. Another thing that we do is very much work to enable that community. What we don't want to do is to go in and then we're demobilized and they've got issues. And so we try and leave a structure for that response to carry on as it winds down. And our history has been that most of those communities that we deploy to, we wind up going back to and helping them plan, and we become, basically lifelong partners. All that takes a budget. That is a challenge. And I would just a comment. Veterinarians are willing to volunteer. One of the things that we've seen, though, in Texas, where we've had so many things happen, is they'll volunteer once. And then the next time you have a conversation, it's go, I can't afford that. I wasn't trained to be there. I'm not going to do it again. And so having these structured teams, I think, are critically important.
Thank you so much. I'm out of time.
Thank you. Just to follow up on that, do you ever get reimbursed by the communities you serve? And does that come through FEMA, or maybe it should?
So we are, the way our state has us set up, we are an eligible applicant. And so we submit our reimbursement packages through the state to FEMA, just like the other state response assets. That's in the declared events, and so we do get reimbursed. On the smaller events, we typically don't. That comes from our donor base.
Do you have any recommendations to make that reimbursement work better? Right, just as we were asking.
So in all honesty, I've had really positive experiences, but we also have a very aggressive accountability program. And I'm just gonna, in answering that question and actually going back to something that Ranking Member Meadows asked about was, how do we make that reimbursement process better? Chief Kidd, our chief of the Texas Division of Emergency Management, one of the things that he's challenged our team with is making sure that we help local communities get to the point where they have good accountability, good record keeping, so that those animal-based responses are indeed reimbursed. Because I can tell you in Texas, the feeling and the opinion is that a lot of those expenses go uncaptured. And for a community that's reeling from the economic outflow that a disaster costs, that's all important.
Thank you, Doctor. Ms. Norton-Holmes?
I have looked at your testimonies, Dr. Mekas and Dr. Bezette, where you discuss the integration of your organizations into emergency management, disaster efforts, and it's very important to note that. But I'm interested in the planning and preparation before the disaster occurs. So let me ask you, what role, if any, does climate change play in your preparations? We're already seeing indications of that across the country.
Well, I can speak to Texas, and I know that, there's no denying that our weather cycles have become more severe. We're seeing flooding in places that we've never seen it before because of the weather patterns, because of land use. There are a number of issues coming together. And so it does take a more aggressive planning approach as our climate does change and our land use changes. You're going to have areas that now flood that used to not flood, either because of the rainfall or changes in drainage. In our 2016 Brazos River flooding, I talked with a rancher that was distraught. He had moved his cattle from the Brazos River bottom to the hurricane pasture. It was the one that had never flooded before, historically. He lost 200 head. They floated down the river. And so as weather conditions get more severe, planning gets to be more aggressive. And whenever it comes to animals, most local governments don't think about the animal professionals that most local jurisdictions have. Animal control officers, livestock officers, many don't even have a veterinarian on staff. They have extension agents, which are amazing in our state, but it takes planning assistance. We have to have better plans as the problems become more severe. So it plays a huge role.
I was surprised, Dr. Bissett, that your model is the only program of its type in the country. Are you working with other universities or other states in any way to replicate that model?
Yes, so we have, and I want to acknowledge some other programs that are very strong as well. I know North Carolina State has a different model where they teach emergency management that's successful. Florida and their program is successful, much smaller scale, but rotations like ours, where all of our students go through a program, we're the only type in the country. And I'm proud that our university has will have educated between 1,400 and 1,500 senior vet students in this discipline by the end of this academic year. That's the answer, is getting them more people prepared to go out around the state, around the country, and to help communities get where they need to get.
Finally, Mr. Patch, do you think there need to be federal requirements to track reunification of families and pets? That would be helpful to the ASPCA's disaster relief efforts. If not, what would help in your efforts to reunite families with pets that get separated during a disaster?
Sure. Thank you, Congresswoman. Much of the work at the ASPCA is done in advance of these storms. We take the animals out of the shelters that are in disaster areas so that those services are available for disaster victims. Lost pets, pets that have become, that are not with their owners any longer, have a place to go and to be safe. We are obviously for documentation. Animals that come into shelters should be properly documented, those that leave. And the better organized any shelter is, the more prepared they will be to be helpful in a time of crisis.
So is there any system to track where, so that a family would know where their pet was, by going online or by coming to some central location?
No, I mean, disaster planning is at the very local level, and shelters operate in communities, and every community, every county, every state has different laws and regulations. Bigger counties have better, not always, but often have better organized systems and can address the needs that you've outlined.
Madam Chair, I do think that there needs to be some kind of model for the states to know how to proceed with respect to pets that then could be disseminated, so you see how somebody did it, how Texas did it, or somebody did it, and you know how to proceed. Because I'm not sure this is on the minds of the average family or a public official when they think about disasters. So this is an important, it's an important hearing, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much, and we want to look at that. I think Virginia supposedly has a gold standard for an online reporting, the animal custody record online reporting system. I don't know if any other states have established that or if we need to look at that program. Yes, Doctor?
So I know in Texas, and just to kind of give an example of how challenging the problem is, in many of the communities that we worked with in Hurricane Harvey, reunion rates were 75, 80%. One of the counties we worked with, their plan was actually to move their animals 90 miles away to a major city. That 90 miles was unbearable, and reunion rates were about 30 to 35%, so it's significant. So it starts at the local level, good planning, good documentation, fostering the ability to develop good plans at the local level is key. We have also, actually I was in meetings right before I flew here, we have a similar program written into our plan where counties that are impacted can provide information on the animals that were found. It goes into a database, up into a website. and it's going to become that centralized place for people that are missing animals to look. Now, it's challenging, and I know from the Camp Wildfire, and I'm sure ASPCA has had the same experiences, you wind up having a lot of visits, and it wasn't their animal, which is heartbreaking. But it's such a worthwhile task, because when you see that person and that animal reunited, it is such a remarkable thing.
I can only imagine. Well, as we look at the Prepared Act and requiring local and state governments to be prepared, maybe part of that preparation is establishing a record where you can check an online reporting system. Should be part of that plan. I wanted to ask you, Mr. Patch, you said your organization has a memorandum of understanding with various governments around the country. Is there anything that prohibits you from entering into those, or are there any problems, anything we can help to alleviate to make it simpler so that more communities or all communities have that kind of agreement with you?
I don't know that we can handle all the communities. I will check, Congresswoman. I know we have dozens, hundreds, perhaps, MOUs with cities, counties, states around the country. And in addition to one of the questions you asked earlier, the ASPCA is the #2 grant-making body in the United States. We've provided tens of millions, $150 million or more in the last 10 years. Not all for disasters, but at least in part, and spent a lot of money in helping to prepare in disasters. And that work is so important, and the work that all the people on the panel is in preparing for disasters is so important. And this hearing and putting the word out about your bill, which would do as much for animals as anything the Congress can do right now, is so important. So thank you.
Thank you. Well, thank all of you very much. I feel strongly about this, and I think we need to do something. But hearing what you all are doing is reassuring that there are things happening. We just don't know about it. We need to coordinate them better and use your example in other places. So I can assure you we're going to continue to push these issues, and any recommendations that you have for us in terms of planning or putting together a reporting system or dealing with FEMA, we hope you will get them to the committee so we can move some kind of legislation. You know, it's not a disaster, but something that also speaks to the value of pets to families is we also have statistics that show that a person will not leave a domestic violence situation or a home where there is abuse if they can't take their pet with them. So it's not just in an emergency. That pet is a critical part of a family's life. So we very much appreciate what you're doing, and we will certainly stay in touch as we move this forward. Thank you. Any further questions? I guess we're it. So seeing none, I'd like to thank all of you again for your testimony. It's been very informative, very helpful. I'd ask unanimous consent that the record of today's hearing remain open until such time as our witnesses have provided any answers or recommendations that may be submitted to us in writing. Unanimous consent that the record remain open for 15 days for any additional comments and information submitted by the members or witnesses to be included in the record. If you have anything additionally you'd like for us to include. Without objection, so ordered. If nobody else has anything to add, we'll stand adjourned.